Good morning, everyone. I'd like to invite, since it doesn't seem that we have many people as of yet, I'd like to invite people to come sit at the table if they'd like. We'd like to have some audience interaction and participation, so please feel welcome to come join us at the table. Thank you.
Hello, Sylvian is here. You can contact with her. Sylvian. You can hear Sylvian now.
Life after obviously before, because after now, the same now, the same, not that result. And take vision and like anything for the week from what happened and what happened when the two return to Earth. Within 2 hours, they are transported from a wasteland environment to a normal that instead of living where everything tends to grow. They come back to a planet where every moment is one important effort. Readapting to Earth, gravity is very, very hard. Because they master and born and witness.
Sylvian, can you close the? Can you unmute?
Around the body. Even though where
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this. We'll just see if the transcript is running. There we go. Welcome to this morning's session, Best Practice Forum, Creating an Enabling Environment for the Development of Local Content. My name is Susan Chalmers. I am one of the lead experts that has, facilitated this discussion over the past 2 months in conjunction with my colleague Stuart Hamilton, who is with the International Federation of Libraries, Associations, and Institutions. Stuart will be joining us in a few minutes. He's making an intervention in another session at the moment, and unfortunately I'll have to duck out for a little bit too, but I'll come right back. So thank you for joining us today. I wanted to begin by explaining the discussion that has been unfolding over the past 2 months. This Best Practice Forum is one of 5 that was established. It's an initiative of the Internet Society. So the point of this session is to be able to come to agreement and kind of tease out of discussion best practices on various internet policy topics. The one that we have been following is the development of local content. And so this discussion has unfolded over the past 2 months on a listserv. And I would just like to give a brief description of how we framed the issue and how this discussion has unfolded, and that the ultimate outcome of this exercise is going to be a document on the best practices for local content creation. There is a draft document. John Laprise, who is the drafter of this document, who's to my left, will explain the paper as it stands right now. But for the moment, the way that we organize the discussion and the way that we will organize the discussion today is that local content is a multifaceted and complex issue. What the list agreed upon was that there's a tripartite or three-part structure to this issue, and that's going to be the format that will follow today during this discussion. So the first area that is relevant when discussing local content creation is internet infrastructure. And my colleague Michael Kende, from Chief Economist at the Internet Society, to my left, will be covering that area. The second area that we will be exploring are the regulatory frameworks or policy frameworks, legislative landscapes that are relevant to the creation of local content. And so we look at areas such as telecommunications regulation, copyright law, perhaps tax schemes for devices which can enable or assist people in developing their own content and putting it online. And my colleague Marta Giraldo, to my right, she shall be speaking on area 2. And finally, the third area that we identified during the discussion was the extent to which the human capabilities and capacities for creating local content. So that really focuses on the personal capacities. Digital literacy, for example, is a sub-issue in Area 3, or a degree of web accessibility in the locality is also an issue. And our colleague, Sylvain Baya Aboka, who's joining us remotely from Cameroon, he shall be addressing that area. And so, without further ado, I'd really like to introduce, or ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Well, we have these 3 areas that each expert will speak upon. At the end, we're lucky to have some insights shared on the technical policy and technical capabilities that relate to local content. To that extent, we have Glenn Dean down at the end from NBC Universal. So I'd like to invite the colleagues to quick introduce themselves, and then we'll turn to John Laprise to present the paper. And after that, we'll have the presentations on the 3 areas. And my colleague Stuart will have returned by then. And we are really keen to have a discussion after each area with the audience on proposed policy initiatives that can facilitate the development of local content under each of these areas. And at the end, what Stuart will do is he will conclude the session by explaining how this conversation will continue, and then we'll share with you suggested next steps. So if we could just go down the line, that'd be great. If you could please briefly introduce yourself and where you're from.
Good morning. My name is Marta Giraldo. I come from Colombia. After working different ministries and private institutions on ICT appropriation, I'm right now from the civil society as ICT specialist for development.
Hello, I'm Michael Kendi. I'm currently the chief economist for the Internet Society. Before that, I was a consultant with Analysis Mason. working, in fact, quite a bit with Internet Society and with other governments around the world to help promote deployment and usage of ICT and Internet access.
Hi, my name is John Laprise. I'm the consulting scholar on this project. My background is in academia, government, and business. I've consulted for the U.S. telecom industry. I was a consulting scholar to the government of Qatar and was part of their broadband steering committee. And I've also been a professor at Northwestern University.
Hi there, I'm Glenn Dean from NBC Universal. I work at NBC to engage with the internet technical community around content issues. So while I spend a lot of time in fun places like the IGF, I also get to go to other fun places like the IETF 3 times a year, where we really are trying to engage on the problem of how do you get content out to people in ways that they can consume it better, and how do you help people create content and distribute it more efficiently on the internet.
Thank you. Might Sylvain be on the line and able to introduce himself?
Je suis Sylvain Maire, coordinateur du groupe de coopération et membre du conseil d'administration des sociétés. Je suis content de faire partie de ce panel et faire sur les questions de développement de contenu locaux. Merci bien.
Merci Sylvain, c'est un peu difficile de vous entendre, donc, mais on va continuer pour l'instant. John, would you please share with us your thoughts on the paper and where we're headed from here?
So this is a new initiative for the IGF and for the Secretariat. This paper was crafted largely upon the contributions of members of the listserv prior to the drafting, with some additional content based on my own research, as I was asked by the Secretary to do. When the draft went up, and this is indeed a draft, and it's a working draft, I fully expected that there would be discussion and input from a broader community. This was intentional. There are gaps in the draft intentionally left there because I knew that based on the content of the listserv, it was not perhaps as broad a discussion as we might get with a broader distribution. And in fact, during the course of this week and in the week following IGF, I'll be working on this draft on an ongoing basis to incorporate those comments from the community into a final draft. That said, I have been following the commentary online, and I just like to, as a side note that my own work, I'm a historian and a social scientist. I believe in rigorous research. I also taught statistics for 4 years, so I have a healthy knowledge of the use of numbers. When I'm looking for evidence, when I'm writing, I am looking specifically for both anecdotal information, which points me in useful and points us in useful directions, but to make broad generalizations, I'm looking for solid empirical research. And in that sense, I'm looking for, best of all would be peer-reviewed research. And I have been posting, I'll be uploading a raft of material that I've been working off of for the past couple of months that have informed some of the discussion, some of the writing I've been, that's in the draft now. And that's an ongoing process. That said, I look forward to additional comments from the community to improve the draft and come to some sort of, maybe not resolution, but at least some sort of points of agreement. I think that's a good sign.
Thank you, John. It's good to have a very hearty academic approach to complement the on-the-ground stories that have been shared over the listserv. for the best practices. So now I'd like to pause to ask the audience if they have any questions about the best practice forum at this point, the process that we've followed, or the draft paper, please. Any questions? No? Okay. Well, in that case, then we will proceed to our first area, Area 1, which focuses on internet infrastructure in the locality. And Michael, please, over to you.
Thank you. So the first area was internet infrastructure and the relation to the development of local content. We, in our discussion, focused a lot on content infrastructure, on the hosting centers, the data centers where the content can be located, and the importance of local hosting for promoting the creation of content. That is, where the content is sitting is important for helping to stimulate more content for reasons that I'll get to. So starting with the observation that a significant amount of internet traffic in Africa and Latin America and other developing regions is coming from abroad, so most of the African traffic would be, at least the internet transit is all going to Europe for the most part. For Latin America, it's mostly going to the US. That's kind of the starting point, and a lot of that is content. So historically, this is a fairly common phenomenon. At one time, the majority of European traffic was going through the US. In fact, when I was at the FCC in the late 90s, we went to see one of the original network access points, that kind of a precursor to the IXPs, in Virginia called May East, and we're told that at one point now would just be exchanged locally or nearby through an internet exchange point, and eventually those internet exchange points became hubs for content, and now you have these enormous hubs in London and Amsterdam serving the entire region with content. So you're starting to see this take place now. In other areas, there's certainly more investment in cables into Africa, into Latin America, between Latin America and Africa. There's more terrestrial fiber being put in place. And through the efforts of many, including the Internet Society, there's a lot more internet exchange points emerging in these countries. And the reason for it, when you talk to a content provider, the reason they're hosting abroad, if they know they're hosting abroad, is because it's cheaper, right? I mean, if you go to one of these big data centers, GoDaddy or something in Europe or the US, it's extremely cheap to get almost unlimited hosting capacity. And a lot of the content providers don't even know that they're hosting there. They go to a developer in their country who has a bulk deal in Europe, and they put all of their content there. So that's understandable. You want to save money, you put it where it's cheapest. The problem is that someone else has to bring that traffic back to the country. So if you're the biggest newspaper in the country and you have an online site, you put it abroad, but the people in your country who want to read it will go through an ISP, and that ISP has to pay a significant amount to bring the traffic back, okay, over the international transit. And so this is, in economic terms, a negative externality. Somebody's taking an economic decision, the content provider, in their best interest, and that's imposing a cost on someone else, in this case the ISPs, who have to bring it back. Not making a direct connection, but pollution is an obvious economic example of network externality, negative externality as well. Someone's taking a decision that hurts others. So in this case, it's even worse than that. So there's a large cost on the ISPs, but they also are imposing latency. It takes more time because of not just the physical distance, but because of the congestion. So if the international capacity is expensive, it might be you might have too little of it, and therefore it'll congest, and it takes even longer, and there's jitter and everything else. And then the results ultimately for the end users are that they're paying more because they're paying the ISP to bring it in, and they're usually paying for data by the bit because their ISP is paying for data by the bit. And because of the latency, there's less usage. We all know you'll give up if something runs really slowly. And then most importantly, you're not creating a content market because others see this. They don't see a content market developing. There's no scale being developed in the content hosting, and so it's inhibiting the market. So the decisions of the content providers that exist to host abroad are also inhibiting the development of a healthy ecosystem in the country. And we've seen examples, for instance, Google has a very aggressive program to put caches in countries around Africa and in other places, the Google Global Cache Program. And when they put a cache in, traffic will skyrocket. So they'll put a cache next to the IXP, mostly for YouTube videos that are very, static content. The traffic will explode. That means that the ISPs are selling more data, so they get more revenues, and they're facing lower costs because they don't have to import every one of those videos every time someone wants to see it from abroad. So that would be the result then of more local content coming back home, as it were, as well. So we talked on the list about a few solutions for this. One thing that's very important is awareness, just an understanding. Not everyone, again, knows where their website is even being hosted. We talked to the CEO of an ISP, a major ISP, in Rwanda, and he had no idea where his website was being hosted, and so we looked it up for him, and of course it was hosted in Europe. So he's paying his own capacity to bring his own website back to his users. Other cases similar to that, one thing people are doing is hosting what they call a local content forum where everyone can get together in the same room, the content providers, the developers, the hosting, the data centers, everyone in the same room to talk about the issues. And in one case, there was a guy who, in Nigeria, who runs a kind of a an Hollywood online movie streaming service, and he was hosting in London. And every time he would come home to Nigeria, he would ask people, are they using his service? And they said, no, it's way too slow. We can't download the movies. But don't worry, though, we can watch all your movies on YouTube. And so he's thinking, well, why can they watch it on YouTube but not from me? So he went to this local content forum and learned what an IXP was and what a cache was and what the reason that YouTube was faster because they had a cache in the country that was serving people locally. And obviously then realized he had to do the same to grow his business so that people weren't watching his movies off of YouTube. So a lot of it is just awareness, understanding what the implications are, hopefully through these types of, obviously this best practice forum is aimed at increasing awareness. Efforts to increase regional scale are very important. Amsterdam has a far, far bigger IXP and content hosting than the size of the country would warrant, and it's because there's no regional barriers, so people from all over Europe and elsewhere are accessing content from Amsterdam. And while everyone wants to be the local hub and the content hub in a region, it may be that every country is not going to have its own hub for all the content. And so it's important to reduce local barriers. Governments hosting locally, like in Rwanda and other places, can help to develop the infrastructure for everyone else, acting as kind of an anchor tenant for putting in content and building up the hosting environment. A lot of people talked about the use of CCTLDs that are hosted and the servers are local, and that increases the speed for local content hosting. So there's a few things that can take place, and ultimately, through this forum and these two other pieces, we really want to put in, identify the best practices to bring this content locally. It's not just the infrastructure, that's what I've been talking about, it's the other pieces. but that putting content locally will lower the costs, lower the latency, and help to promote an ecosystem for developing more content.
Thank you, Michael. I'd just like to ask the audience a question here. In terms of content and traffic, are there participants here who are aware of whether or not traffic trombones out of their country to Europe or the US, as Michael was describing, and coming back? If I could just get a show of hands. Yes? No? Okay. Well, one of the things that we'd like to do as part of this exercise is to encourage sharing of stories about the state of the internet infrastructure in your locality. So if anybody feels so inclined throughout the session, please do raise your hand, because we will be inviting participation.
I just had a more general thought and response. I don't know if this is the right time. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Aparna Sridhar. I'm counsel with Google. And, you know, I appreciate you cited our example in terms of the cache. I think one thing we have been very mindful of is, in general, it's best to move content closest to the end user, and that drives costs down. That's obviously correct. But I think there are some challenges with local hosting that you haven't sort of fully played out, at least in the presentation. And I would just name sort of three principal challenges. One is in-country hosting, especially if the internet ecosystem isn't very robust, is often not as resilient or as secure as hosting services abroad. And so if you're a local content producer, you may very rationally want to contract not only for services that are cheaper, but that have more security, better resiliency. The second is that uptime can be a significant issue in places that there are significant power outages. So it's not an issue of the local hosting provider is not a good provider. It's just simply that the overall infrastructure is not sufficient to support hosting. And then the third point I would make is, you know, for certain kinds of content, there are, and really for hosting providers in general, there are regulatory considerations that need to be taken into account. So if you have a regulatory framework that is in which intermediaries carry a lot of liability, for example, or if the government is very intrusive and there could be significant censorship concerns, there are good reasons on the flip side that you might be wary of hosting locally. And so I just think that obviously we agree in the general case that hosting is as close to the end user is beneficial, but there are some countervailing considerations, and I mean, I think at least on our side, we would certainly say that a mandate to host locally would not make sense.
Taking that last point first, I don't think we're talking about a mandate, but I think it's a good point to raise the downside. I guess I was presenting the optimistic point, and certainly when you do one of these local content for a forum, you know, people will raise that, but sometimes it's a perception that, and that's one other good reason to bring everyone in the room, where people will say, you know, there's just a perception that there's less resilience or less quality locally, but they haven't really tested it. And for instance, the power issue is actually related to cost. In most places they will have backup generators, but that is what makes it more expensive to host locally than abroad. So that's definitely an issue as well, and we shouldn't gloss over that there are legitimate reasons why it's cheaper overseas and why people may put their content there. They should just really understand, I think, the local market and make sure that it's not a prejudice from...
It can be attributed to those that indirect policies that indirectly facilitate the creation of local content, and just while we will be moving into that second area dealing with the regulatory issues, there were examples that came up during the discussion of government policies that required that government information be hosted in country. And so it was also discussed that sometimes policies like these indirectly encourage local content development because they feed into the infrastructure within that country. There's economic development of the infrastructure in that company to meet that policy. So I think that since we are kind of on the topic of Area 2 and regulatory landscapes, I'd like to turn to our second panelist, Martha, who will be discussing this Area 2.
Thank you. I was asked to bring up some examples on content development and maybe perhaps pass to this regulatory 20,000 full text specialized documents. They also have statistics, analysis, and reports on productive chains or sectorial information out of 44 databases. They have online courses and forums, product offers and demands, national and wholesale prices, supply prices, foreign trade prices, information about credits, information about productivity. They also have agroclimatic reports with weather alerts by region, with climate impact on agriculture and on products. Also, they have multimedia applications for delivering this information to small producers, making it easier for them to access that information. And they also have the possibility of access the information by producers via cell phones. It can be downloaded at domestic prices, the supply prices, and with the weather alerts for the specific region. With these services, Agronet is then supporting the user capabilities for planning, production, investment, and all related processes. Palm producers, to the Palm Association and the Banana Association, and also FAO is collaborating with this information. So these institutions are the main providers of the Agronet databases and the documentation of all of this big digital library. That's how it came. That's the first example that I wanted to address. The second one is Ministry of Culture, the National Library, a project for conservation and digitalization of the National Library historical heritage. The objective here is to digitize, group, put in context, give meaning, and make accessible the National Library contents, starting with those that are unique documents, valuable, fragile, and representative of the national heritage and literature. Some characteristics of this information is we're talking of all types of documents. So we're talking about text, manuscripts, audio, photographs, maps, lead music sheets, videos, movies. It's open access, which is around 5 million pages. 54 persons working for the conservation area and digitalization. And this in terms of examples, but although they are very good initiatives, they are not really a result of a national policy in terms of agreeing on how this information should be delivered. And there are some more good ideas, and I know all the Latin America, if I can talk about in a regional basis. There are lots of good small examples on local initiatives and some more to really make this information be accessed by people in the municipalities. In my country, for example, where the Ministry of Communications, which is actually here at the forum, he's connecting all the municipalities of the country. We had a donation of the Bill and Melinda Aspects. It's a long term, and it's a long work, it's a difficult work, and we need to start working on that. So that's what's that we're really looking for in my country, having some agreements. I'm starting to talk about that because it doesn't come, I mean, it's not an initiative that's coming from the government, and so we, from the other institutions, we need to really put a word on that and start moving this necessary policy regulations, policy declarations, or in that terms. That's what I really wanted to talk about.
Thank you so much, Martha. Thank you very much. I'm going to change out with Stuart here, who's going to take the helm, but I'd like to invite Konstantinos to say a few words as well on this area too. Thank you, Konstantinos.
Thank you, Susan, and hello everybody. My name is Konstantinos Koumaitis, and I'm with the Internet Society.
And I'm looking forward to picking up the discussions. Now, I'm going to bring in at this point Glenn Dean from NBC. After Glenn, we're going to bring in Sylvain, who is our remote participant, and we're just making sure that we've got everything set up there. So Glenn, over to you. I know you've got a few things to share on this subject.
Yeah, it's an interesting time we live in. A lot of people have to incorporate this new idea that content isn't just that stuff I get from the TV or the radio or the library. It's stuff that I create too. Okay, so now we have a problem. And the problem is this. How do I get other people to find my content? And it's hard enough if and they want to see when I tag a thing that I'm on the beach. They want to know when Glenn's on the beach. Maybe not me on the beach, maybe somebody else. But and when we have countries that are having content they are creating in their local context, whether it's the various bits of data that we just heard described, or maybe it's the coffee prices, or maybe it's some new research around distribution of coffee into a particular marketplace that's generated in that local language.
We're going to wait until Susan comes back to see if she's able to help us a little bit with the...
Volume isn't a problem at this end. I'm Ellen Blackler with the kind of government content that I think you were talking about in Colombia. One of the things that might be a way to kind of link up the market opportunities and the regulatory issues is to think about the government content and generated content as kind of the anchor tenant idea. To the extent some of these issues are about, some of the hosting issues are about having the scale and scope regionally and locally to make the economics work out well, the government could think of itself as
that's already well advanced in that. So that's a complicating factor.
Thanks, John. We have someone from the remote. Oh, from yourself. Go for it.
Yeah, I presented yesterday, I'm Dr. Aaron Van Clyten from the University of Greenwich. One of the findings of the research that I conducted on internet governance in Africa so far and done some reading around it, the more nuanced, so is there any kind of discussion around what to do outside of the French, Spanish, and whatever other main languages there are, and moving into the kind of Wolof and other sort of smaller languages? I mean, how do countries deal with that? Is there any kind of roadmap for that? Whoever can respond.
Well, actually, I might, in just a second, maybe John might comment on some of the things that came through in the paper, but actually, as we have an audience here with people from all over, I wonder if there is anyone that might want to comment if you're from a sort of
That's one suggested, that's one suggestion, I should say. It varies very much with the really specific, it's culturally relevant. And what technologies that people employ in a particular locale vary depending on the infrastructure, depending on socioeconomic status. It's a big problem, and I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. The closest is the
sorts of initiatives, because it's a very complex web, and it deals a lot with the politics of the country, who's in charge, from which tribe is he or she.
Discoverability element of this as well, because what libraries can do in this sort of situation is to bring together collections of content in minority languages, for example, and to make people...
Every time somebody decides to go work on a metadata project, the first thing they say is, oh, we need to create a new standard, and they create a new standard, and then it goes to another country, which then takes it and creates another new standard. This is making the problem horrible. And in some cases, some of the standards are in fact proprietary and closed. And so one of the things I would like to put out as a sort of a statement that I believe in very strongly is that we do need standardized metadata that is very broad across different types of media. But also we need it to be an open standard. And in fact, one of the, I think, new frontiers, I think that the different standards organizations really need to start looking at is in fact working with metadata, standardizing it, and making it open so that we can build protocols around it at the IGF level, access and discovery, in other places like W3C, for instance, build it into your browser, and then let it all work together with infrastructure elements. And it's sort of a new frontier that we haven't done before, because if you look at the way we have our existing organizations tiered around the internet, we have policy, we have getting the data there, and we have getting it presented in your browser. We don't have a group that you would go to that would work on metadata and make it work with all of these various other groups in a consistent way. And I think that maybe sort of a missing piece as we evolve this this next generation internet.
Thanks. But I think it could be definitely explored within the context of this best practice forum, but it's making me make a note to go away and see exactly what my colleagues are working on, because I think it could definitely help.
Well, I'll point out one of the, in my business of TVs and movies, one of the fundamental things we actually have to grapple with is that there hasn't been in the past a universally applied, even identifier for what a piece of content is. And even before you can do anything else, you got to find it. And before you can find it, you have to be able to say what it is you're looking for. And we've lacked a universal identifier. Now, the entertainment industry has adopted a thing called EIDR, EIDR. It's an acronym for entertainment industry, digital something, I forget. I always forget the darn acronym what EIDR stands for. But EIDR is a universal identifier you can apply to a piece of content and actually track it through even edited versions. It allows you to find it. One of the things we're really lacking on the internet is that same universal identifier for non-studio content, non-professional content, something that you could actually use to name a piece of content on Facebook and have it named the same thing on YouTube and have it named the same thing on DK and have it named the same thing everywhere. So that when I wanted to say, I want to find this thing, here's the name of it. And that would be a great place to have an open standard built around that we could all build stuff on. And then places like the IGF and W3C could innovate around it in their standards.
And sit silently until someone put their hand up. It made me squirm quite a lot. But I could try that technique, or I could ask if anyone has any comments. So, opening the floor to you.
Thank you. Getting it piecemeal, so we're working in one country to try and gather the data about what is the cost, the latency, the traffic, hosting, and so we'll certainly share those results here and elsewhere to further this discussion. But I think that's a great point to, as we move beyond the IXP, to think about other areas where we can create toolkits and best practices.
And I think this would be really valuable on the really small producers and small language issues, because a lot of the producers that are going to produce that kind of content aren't going to have a lot of, coming to the enterprise with a lot of background knowledge. So that's something.
Yeah. My name is Kaigwa Ayomi. I'm from Benin. I think that my English is not good, so I'm a French speaker, but I will try to speak English. So I think that we must have a lot of service provider must have a data center, because in Africa they think people don't believe.
As you said, it's when you are minor language or culture, it will be small in Facebook posting and something like this. But maybe we can find some way to make some way to make people making for this content to put them, to upload them to the internet, what meets their culture. When the people looking for this culture, they can find it. But there is one problem, that when we make people, as you said before, that the people encourage people to upload the content, to just give them a mobile and they will upload the content. We have problem in our country with this. Everybody put the contents from his point of view. They are not pure contents or pure information. I put the information from my point of view, and somebody put it from the other side and the other point of view. So it will not be a pure information, or what we say, it will not be as pure information as I said. It will be just
local content they want to have and to use. So it's just an information that I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So Nicholas, take the question, then we'll go to the panel for comments, and then we'll see if we can get Sylvain for some comments at the end.
Thanks a lot, Nicholas Saylor, Internet Society. So two brief questions. Within the working groups, have you guys discussed about initiatives like Facebook Zero, which is about providing Facebook for free in some countries, and the implications on local content and other possible effects? And the other question is more broader, maybe it's more for the conclusions, but are you thinking about, given this is about local content and the local level, are you thinking about recommending that this discussion sort of feeds the regional IGFs as well in upcoming months, again, given the local relevance? Thank you.
Okay, does anyone want to tackle anything that's been thrown out there? We have sort of issues really about infrastructure, I think, and the need for sort of service providers and more data centers. Cultural information, which I think is quite interesting, as opposed to just language information. And then some capacity building and training. So, any thoughts? Martha first.
Oops. I would like to say that yes, it's really difficult to really find one solution for everything, because we have different needs in terms of the countries, the countries that are on development, on the way of development, and we have these things when people are really have no infrastructure, and they are getting this infrastructure, but there's no those facilities, and the needs of the local people for really getting to put the content there. We need a lot of help down there. That's where I think the libraries could be a really nice and interesting and ideal places for really transforming them, and on these places for dialogue, for amending communities, and for development content locally, helping these processes. But anyway, there's something up there that has to be done for the librarians and the libraries, because they cannot really work on zero there.
And the idea is to get people to start using the internet, and then presumably they'll start clicking on other things that will start incurring data charges. So that's a whole other discussion. But one thing that has come up, and I don't think we raised it, and maybe we can take it forward as a solution, is, so you have this issue that if the data is hosted abroad, it has to be brought in at great expense, $125, $200 per megabit per second per month. So significant cost, whereas if it's sitting on the IXP, effectively, the cost, the marginal cost is close to zero for accessing it, because you're accessing the IXP anyway. So in two countries that I know of, I think Chile and South Africa, local content, accessing local content didn't count against your data plan because the lower cost. Now that was for DSL. I have tried to do some research, and maybe this would be the place to start talking about this is one of the solutions. The economic solution is obvious, right? You're going to get much more data usage if it's free, but you have to know that it's local and to go search on it. So there's some definite issues, and it was used in those countries for DSL rather than mobile, but it isn't a solution that would certainly help attract local content, because you know that there's going to be more usage if it's local because it's free, rather than paying effectively an international rate to access content that's local.
I'd like to make one sort of comment, which it's somewhat obvious, but I think we sometimes ignore it. And we talk a lot about the wires and the caches and all the other low-level infrastructure needs that the internet has to make it all work. You know, one of the beautiful things about content is actually it drives that growth. You know, at the heart of it, the internet is about content, not about sending packets around. And we sometimes, I think, focus on a lot of discussion about moving packets, very little discussion about the actual process of creating content. So I think one of the good things that's come out of this process is we started that discussion here in this part of this group, and this whole idea of creating content niches around it, I think, is valuable to have talked about. And that maybe one of the good outcomes we can have is we can get more people in the room here to take away that same perspective as they go home and start thinking, well, you know what, moving the packets is important, but what do you do with them once you got the ability? Is the next evolution that we take.
To my colleague from Yemen, I would say that I know in many of the Gulf states this is a real problem, what you're talking about, and I know in Qatar they are doing a lot to educate users, sort of in a media literacy kind of way. It's like determining what is you know, a fake email or a scam email or spam, or not spam, but a phishing attack, for instance. And I think that this is something of a learning curve for people who are unfamiliar with the technology. They're learning what to trust and what not to trust. And that's a trial and error kind of basis for many people. And so I think over time that problem will actually resolve. In the short term, it's problematic, and what you can do to address it is, you know, talk to other people, especially regionally and across, in your case, across the Middle East, about other countries that are doing programs on media literacy, because there's a lot going on in the region that you may be able to piggyback on.
So that's, from my perspective, a kind of good seed. I mean, that idea, you know, sharing information across the regions to actually find out what's already being done. And obviously with the setting up of this discussion over the last 2 months with the online mailing list and now this panel here, we don't see this as being anywhere near done. I mean, there's a lot more to discuss here. So I mean, it's worth talking a little bit, I think, about where we might go next with this. I think Nicholas's ideas about this being picked up in the regional IGFs is a good one. And there's more and more national IGFs each year, and it's clear that there are some national conversations happening, which would be great to get some feedback from. As you'll all be aware, we have the draft of the paper online. The commenting period for that is still most definitely open, so we want to have more people taking a look at that. If you haven't seen it, it's extremely easy to comment. I'm just wondering if the URL for all of it on. I don't have it in front of me, but you can ping that to me. The plan is that all of the comments that we're going to get from here at the IGF and during the commenting period will be worked into the sort of the next round of the draft, and then we'll work towards finalising it. And then I think, I mean, we had some pretty decent discussion there, and I think it can go further on the mailing list. So we're going to keep that moving, and we're going to invite more of you to pick this up. So this really isn't a done deal. John, what's the sort of immediate next steps for the next revision of the draft?
Well, the next step is I'm going to be working on the draft over the course of the week, incorporating comments and reacting to comments as they come. I've just forwarded a bunch of the primary research or the secondary research material I've been using to supplement the work of the list. And that will be made available as well as a library and archive of background material. So the next step is I am encouraging everyone to please continue submitting comments. Go to the website, which is, I've got it up on my computer, but I've been tweeting it. So get on Twitter and take a look at me and you can find a link, among other things. But please do comment. Your comments are what drive this process. And without your comments, the outcome is not as strong as it might be. So please come and comment, and your comments will be incorporated into the final draft of this document.
That's great. We do. Sorry. Yes, please go for it.
Thanks. So just very quickly in continuing this work, it was one of the, this group was, the discussions were so very interesting, so I think that it is very important that we all, even after the compilation of comments has been done and we have a text, that we continue and delve more into the issues that have been identified. One of the things that was particularly interesting is that we had a lot of case studies. A lot of people were bringing personal experiences from Africa and from Colombia and from other parts of the world, identifying the issues in relation to local content, technology issues, and then we have regional IGFs or the consultations rounds that will be happening around the MAG, and of course having as a vision Brazil in 2015 in order to actually have a much more concrete and more robust contribution when it comes to local content. I think is particularly important with more information, because I think that this is an area that we can all work to actually get something out of it. Cheers.
So just before we close, and I'm extremely pleased to say that we have some input from Sylvain to close, the URL which will take you to these drafts is review.org. So that's review.intgovforum.org. And Susan, I understand that is this connected to the... No, we have another remote contribution.
From Juha Leonen, University of Helsinki, Finland. She has a general comment, or he has a general comment. 3 keywords seem to be cache, libraries, and metadata. Cache on the level of infrastructure, removing unnecessary traffic. Libraries collect local content. Multilingual metadata enables.
We were finally able to have just a few phrases from Sylvain that I want to share because they were quite nice. But and the third area deals with the human capabilities and capacities. And Sylvain just wanted to say that the group has worked I'm translating here, so please bear with me. The working group, but perhaps one of the most important aspects is the fact that the man, l'homme, the person, is at the center of the ecosystem of the promotion of content, local content. And it's for that factors tied to infrastructure, to applications, or even to regulatory environment should all draw back to the person and what we're capable of. And that's, I'm afraid, since we're out of time, he is sharing some further phrases, but we'll have to incorporate these into the paper within that collaborative platform. So again, thank you everybody for being here, and over to Stuart.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the work that went. The idea is really to encourage the IGF community to work towards tangible, useful outcomes. We've been saying a lot that the IGF is a place where there's a lot of discussion, but actually nothing tangible for delegates to take home. This said, and I'm very happy about the way Susan and Stuart led this work. This said, this is not a negotiation. This is consensus-based, and it is very important for us from the technical community, as this is the way we work. If we have no consensus, then we put the issue aside, or we just recognize that we don't have consensus, and that's perfectly fine. The objective being to identify common ground, and if possible, build new common ground. So with regards to the draft outcomes, this draft was put together over a very short period of 7 weeks. over the August month, and a lot of people were on vacation. And I just want to emphasize that this is ongoing. This is in process of development. Comments that were expressed today will be taken into account. If there's the need to extend or refocus the draft, that will be done because we are working on a consensus based. I just wanted to make that point extremely clear. Thank you very much.
So thank you everyone. That concludes this session. Could we thank our panelists in the traditional way?